Hi, good evening. My name is Vishak, and I bring another webinar session to you as part of the Apposite webinar series. And this time around, I think we'd be dwelling into something very interesting, very hot potato for the L&D world as such, when it comes to especially something like compliance training. So that's what we are going to look at today. I have Sid with me, who's the organizer for this call. I also have John, who is a longtime mate of mine, worked on various projects. John was a client of mine at one point of time. All in out, he is like a quintessential learning professional that I have come across, and I really have some really wild conversations with John on various topics. It's really cool to have you here with us, John. I'll
Thanks.
let you kind of introduce yourself so that because you have so many years going over there. So yeah.
Hi, I'm John. I'm a learning consultant. I'm currently acting as a learning consultant on behalf of Apposite Learning Solutions. My background started out in healthcare, working actually as a healthcare professional. And that sort of went towards the more training side of things, and I got more involved in the educational aspects of healthcare before leaving the NHS. And then I eventually went to primarily oil industry, initially with a health lean, so occupational health in oil, and then ultimately another ed tech company that was working in oil, but now I'm acting and working as a freelance consultant. So yeah, I've got quite a few years of educational experience in both public and private sector.
Yeah, and I would say very relevant because health and oil and gas and so many other domains, I think they would really fit within that compliance domain where most of the learning is highly critical. And in fact, I would go as far as to say that, life critical in various situations. So thank you so much, John, for being here and shedding some light on this very interesting topic. So
It's okay.
yeah. So as I was saying, like what we are trying to do is in the next 1 hour, we are trying to dig deeper into compliance training and how it came about, some insights into why it's not working as it is in its current form. And obviously, John and I would be giving some insights into how we think, compliance should be like, what would be beneficial, and what are some things that we can do to bring about that change within compliance training. So yes, really excited and trying to get in. I think we should start with the actual question that we were discussing here, John. Let me bring that up. This, I think this is where it all starts, right? I mean, it's whatever we are looking at right now is just a system where people come in and check a box and say that, yeah, I did this training. Did they actually get something out of it, or is it really useful? Nobody knows. So, uh,
Yeah, I think instructional design has sort of classically struggled with this problem. How do you know? How do you know that the learner understands? And that's very difficult to do in an impersonal way, shall we say. So you get a sort of regression to a system whereby you can have really beautiful, well-constructed, pedagogically sound digital training that uses multimodal approaches, nice and complex. Maybe it uses branch scenario-based stuff.
what have you?
But fundamentally, nobody is going to pay for that for something like, oh, here is your moving and handling training for an office worker. So it's always going to be of a certain type, which is usually involving some form of multi-choice question type setup, which has got responses that are very, very easy to memorize. They get unlimited attempts at completing them.
Yeah.
So you create a system whereby it seems to be compliance for compliance's sake, and you have to question whether or not people actually understand it. But generating a system that does understand it is obviously not without its challenges.
True. And it's sort of like giving the easy way out to everybody, right? I mean, just click next to continue, and at the end check a box, and that's it, you're done. Did you
Yeah,
actually get any learning? Was there any change in your behavior or the processes and all? No, we don't know that.
yeah, exactly. And especially when these things are intended to tie into an organizational culture, for example, if you're attempting to achieve a cultural shift, why would you just do the same thing over again that we kind of suspect is just a tick box? If we
Yeah.
have an alteration in something, say like when GDPR came, quite a while ago now, but obviously that resulted in a number of places in the UK having to get their workforce up to speed on what GDPR meant for them. And of course, that means a lot more mandatory e-learning, which people have got to get more time to do. And that it creates problems in dissemination of that information.
Yeah.
Because the embedded nature is, well, we'll just skip to the quiz and pick the sensible answers.
Quickly as you can. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because time is the most valuable thing people have, and increasingly at work these days. The working world right now is very fast paced, and there's not a lot of downtime, and there's not a lot of time allocated to learning and development for staff, because it's all operational. We need to be operationally effective. And it's striking that balance that means that we don't end up draining a company's budget through L&D, but also can efficiently have workers who do understand these critical things, compliance training.
But one would expect them to understand the significance of this training, especially in situations or domains like healthcare. For example, medical professionals. We know how critical it is to follow some of those required processes and all, and we have trainings for that, right? So
100%.
we
Yeah.
would expect them to know that yes, I need to take this training, but we do see that that's not the case. It's always a lapse, or most often it's like we are forcing them to kind of take it. Why is that? Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I mean, it's because the systems they're just not sustainable. They're not proven effective. They're not sustainably effective, or not effective enough to basically convince people that they have value. So if we've got cynicism about the effectiveness of tick box type compliance training, then if that cynicism is such that it has people disengage with that type of training in the future, it's a self-fulfilling cycle.
Yeah.
We just perpetuate the problem by continuing to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think part of the issue, particularly with regulatory compliance training, or some regulatory compliance training, is that there is quite a high degree of repetition. Spaced repetition in learning, great thing, brilliant. But it's only if you're actually trying to learn something. Spaced repetition for something you've already learned is quite frustrating for people, but you never know which people need which. So you could be trying to tell them something they don't already know, but if you're encompassing it in a lot of stuff that they do already know, you're going to lose engagement. There's a lot of talk about engagement in structural design. Oh, we want things with engagement. Give us engagement, but engagement is entirely individual. Your engagement with a piece of learning really does depend on whether or not you already know it. If you already know it, you're going to go, I already know this. Sit through it for 45 minutes now. Fantastic, but you still have to sit through it.
Yeah.
And that's inefficient, and frustrating for people at work, and frustrating for managers at work who want to make sure they've got good time efficiency.
Overall. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no real clear benefit that it makes any difference. Do we measure rates of these things and make them public?
I know. It's a catch-22 situation. We don't know. I mean, it's like do we first go ahead and design the most ideal system over there, which clearly is not possible. Then we kind of design these systems and hope to God that they improve. So not sure at all. But yeah, it is an interesting topic.
Absolutely.
John, I think I had a chat on the comment in the chat that would want you to speak louder. I think.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
2 seconds.
early, so that's fine.
see if I can tweak my settings.
So yes. While you're doing that, I believe we already have introductions. We are speaking over here, John and I, primarily because we have quite a bit of experience in the learning and development industry, and specifically with respect to regulatory training, compliance related training. So we do see where it's not working at the moment. So I think that's why we are trying to come here and share our insights and see if there is some way we can spark a debate, a discussion, and hopefully get the people who are creating these solutions to have a little think and see if there's something different that we can do. So we are going to kind of look into some bit into the evolution of how compliance training came about, just to kind of understand its original, its roots and such, and see if there is something we can borrow from there going forward, so that we are not stuck in the current, for lack of a better word, the muck that we are in, that we are currently doing in terms of compliance training. But yeah, I mean, so uh, objectives covered, and let's look a little bit into the evolution of compliance training. So John, I believe how it started about, and we all know this, in probably earlier times, way before even medieval times, I think apprenticeship is the way in which critical skills were cascaded through, right? I mean, from one generation to another. So,
Yeah.
can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, apprenticeship for traditional skills, carpentry or all that sort of thing was very much the way of things in the past. And you had a system whereby there was a master who had been, doing carpentry for X number of years, and they took on an apprentice who then went through an informalized training program that wasn't, structured or had all of the things like you must wear eye protection because it didn't exist.
Most often, the apprentice would be staying with the master and would be emulating whatever the master is doing. That's the hope, right?
Yes, and that's then you've got the evolution of technology, which says that eye protection is good and safety is good and all that sort of stuff. But these are all learned behaviours that have been adopted by those industries. So yeah, they would take on an apprentice, and the apprentice would go through a long, indeterminate period, usually of training, whereby the evidence that they were trained was in the product that they produced.
Right.
So the carpenter, for example, would master a certain type of joint, and you'd have subspecialties and all that sort of thing.
Right.
And we see similarities in certain educational systems in the modern world, more particularly in the UK. I would give doctors as a pretty good example. So doctors still really do kind of have that system where you've got the master, the consultant, and then you have there's more mobility. But once a doctor has chosen a specialty, then usually they're assigned to a small team with a consultant with long-term mentorship,
Experience.
supporting and
Yeah.
educational structure. And there's a reason it's that way. It's that way because it produces people who are pretty safe, that have had experience supported over a very long period of time.
Right.
But of course, this isn't entirely practical in a majority of workforces to have fully supported practice for very long periods of time in order to gain experts or develop skills better. But I think what the mistake we've made with particularly compliance training, as it's sort of transitioned into digitally delivered training, following CBT, computer-based training, which was 50s really started, and then made advances into aviation primarily because really complex technical thing to do, and
Defense,
lends itself well
yeah.
to rote memorization. The rote memorization professions do tend to benefit slightly more from computer-based training because it's all about memorizing things and recall. And then, as we see today, we've now got compliance training that is just allocated to you as soon as you join a business. Usually, you get a big list of training to do, and you go, "Oh, great, another lot of training to do." Then you do half of it, don't bother to do the rest of it, and nobody chases you up. So what's the point? We've gone too far the other way.
Way too
We,
far. Yeah.
yeah, we've tried to hand it off to something that just does it. We don't really care about it. And I think it's particularly timely to look at what's happened in terms of compliance training with current technological developments. In that, if we can't figure out how to do with a computer now, why are we suddenly going to magically figure out how to do it with a computer next week?
Yeah.
It doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to do. We need to understand what the real problems are before we even remotely think about how those problems are solved. So yeah, there's
compounded more when technology came in, because suddenly there is this feeling that you can completely remove the human quotient from it, and AI and other systems can actually completely do that, which is in a way wrong, or not. It's not an effective way of thinking, because what about all the tacit knowledge that these experts carry around with them, right? I mean, there's only to a certain extent we can expect AI or another system to emulate what these experts are actually carrying around with them. So
I think that with respect to this sort of thing, I'm not convinced that AI is going to have massive impact on this sort of tick box compliance training situation in the short term. But I think a cleverly designed system that keeps human in the loop, with AI being effectively a third party to track more than anything else, information is probably going to be more realistic. My main sort of thought about this is it would be a pretty reasonable idea, rather than to batter people with tons of e-learning when they join a company, is to perhaps give them access to the company's AI system that basically asks them about their previous experiences with certain things related to stuff like
some
GDPR.
context.
Because if you can personalize that experience, or if you can draw on personal experience from your staff, you're not treating them like they're silly, like they're stupid. Because that's what a lot of people will feel when they're doing their 300th, equality and diversity or whatever particular piece of e-learning content. People do remember things, and the trouble with the tick box is that it assumes that you're just completely blank from the start, and that's never the case. So it can help to personalize that process.
It's actually a huge issue, right? Because why did compliance training come up in the first place? It's to make sure that whatever we are doing is done safely, and that it follows certain code that ensures that everybody who's connected in that business or that organization is safe and morally going in the right direction. All these are part of it. But then how has that suddenly become a system where it's about companies need to be just legally protected, make sure that there are no lawsuits coming against them? So it's kind of shifted to that side.
I think the the business world has sort of developed in that vein, though. It is quite a litigious environment. You can't really escape it.
Yeah.
And this is a response to that litigiousness, is that you can have this system whereby you have demonstrated effectively that you've told that employee the way they should be. You've told them what bribery is, and you've told them what corruption is. They probably already know what bribery and corruption is, probably got a reasonably good idea when they're engaging in it too. They're not likely to report themselves.
No.
But it's the fact that they need to have this piece of paper with a signature on it to feel even remotely safe from that time when an employee does take a bribe and then is prosecuted, to prevent that company from being dragged down simply because they didn't inform, an adult, a grown human being, what bribery is. And that I find pretty alarming, really, that we need it spelled out to us when most people would see it as quite obvious when you were taking a bribe. And that's part of the problem, especially in a sort of working environment where there is a lot of transferability, there's a lot of transition of people between companies. Yeah, cyclical thing, or maybe 4 or 5 years with one company and then go to another one. You've got the gig economy, which is evidence that is going to be a bigger thing in the wider economy.
Yeah.
People don't want to be told this stuff repeatedly and all the time, and it's inefficient, and it insults people's intelligence a little. So.
Yeah.
But there also does need to be legal protection for the companies. So any system would need to be able to provide assurance. But an AI system can do that just as well as a certificate system. But it gives you the opportunity to perhaps approach it in a different way that is slightly less intensive. Whereby you can have a single certificate that says, yeah, we've met all of this company's requirements as per mandatory training. Because the constant updating cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does this change? I mean, as far as I know, compliance can be broadly categorized into two major buckets, right? One is your behavioral compliance, where you're looking at ethics and anti-harassment, what you just said about bribery and money laundering and such. And you have your operational compliance, where there are regulations and health and safety protocols that need to be, adhered to. So is this issue that we are seeing in compliance training applicable across both these, or do you think like there's any differences?
I think it's more related to stuff that is behavioral compliance, because stuff that's related to operational compliance, particularly health and safety stuff, is surrounded by its own health and safety procedures, and they are very admin heavy procedures, but they need to be, because they're to do with preservation of life mostly. So it is more geared towards behavioral compliance, because operational compliance tends to be managed by a skills or competence management system. So there are bespoke, unique systems, but what we do lack is any form of sort of standardized way of putting that sort of system together that's transferable. We don't have that sort of all-encompassing competence management baseline that says we can take a role and then we can make a competence framework for that role and immediately plug it into a competence management system that arranges working patterns, access to particular different things or different experiences, and manage that with feedback from assessors and candidates and all that sort of stuff to manage that sort of system. So when it comes to sort of operational compliance or competence, the systems get more complex, but they tend to be more bespoke to that particular job type or company.
Right.
So you do see increased complexity when it comes to operational compliance things. But again, these are things that could probably benefit from having a more streamlined process.
And yet,
I think
not what we see, right? I mean, you did mention now that it would be ideal to have a competency framework or a structure where we have defined what are the tasks, what are the skills required, what are the knowledge areas, and to build that kind of a content management, competency management system. It's surprising why we have not yet at least arrived at something like that. But is it because we are not really paying much attention to the details and just going on?
I think in safety critical commercial industries and in public service industries, speaking from exposure to stuff inside the NHS and stuff in private industry, they do have systems. It's mostly problematic because systems don't talk to each other.
Mm,
So, I mean, health is quite a good example because there was quite a complicated competence system put into health for nursing staff.
mm,
But then if you go and work in the private sector, you lose access to it, but you're still a nurse.
mm,
so,
mm.
so it's like, well, but you're still a nurse.
But you
So
don't
there,
have
there,
access
there
to
are,
the system to tell you that this is what you need to learn and this is what you need to go with. Yeah.
and you can lose centralized access to a system that basically allows you to have a simple way to maintain being a nurse by having things that align with your particular job. But yeah, yeah,
A universal
it's,
makes
yeah.
sense. Makes sense. Yeah. And maybe with advancements in AI and such, now we might be able to kind of put together something like that. I
Yeah, I
hope.
saw an interesting tool that was using AI to do just that. Just yesterday, I think it was. There was an interesting tool that these guys they were saying that they wanted to use AI to create competence maps for particular roles.
Hmm,
So yeah, it is something that's definitely being thought about.
hmm, hmm.
Um, but well, I think that's my daughter arriving home.
But yeah, I guess what you're saying is true. I mean, currently with all these kind of issues that's going on, it's important to kind of understand that human oversight over these kind of critical areas, training in certain critical areas, that's very important, and we can't really leave it entirely to the AI or an
Yeah,
automated
yeah.
system to take care of it. So
Absolutely. I think AI at the moment there's quite a lot of hype and not a lot of evidence. I do, however, maintain that the technology as it's coming through it will have value, definite value for sure. It does things mostly because of the way it can be interacted with. You can ask it to do complicated things rather than have to understand the complicated things you want it to do before telling it to do it.
right,
And
right.
that's kind of the big revolution in AI is that
Mm,
we can all vibe code now. Yeah, we can all make a web page now. Cool.
yes.
It'll probably break or be hacked within 30 seconds, but cool, we
Right.
can make it. But that's the start of something pretty significant. That it's democratizing that skill. Um, I mean, it's democratizing it to the intellectual equivalent of a toddler, but
Because
but it's
the
still doing it.
human
It's
element to
still
make sure that whatever is being created is sound from all angles, and making sure it's
100%.
there. That's
So,
something
so any
really.
AI deployment these days does by sort of default have human in the loop. It's not chewing away jobs as dramatically as some
Oh
would
no, not
argue.
as how it's advertised
Uh,
online. No
yeah,
way.
yeah, for sure not. Because one of the things is very much you need a real problem to solve before you can apply something to solve it. And at the
Correct.
moment, I think we're very much in the sort of stage of figuring out what the problems really are.
A
And
lot of
it,
solutions, but
yeah,
what's clearly the problem that we need to look at is something that's, yeah,
yeah.
it's ingenious. True.
So for me, it's all about what improvements can be made with the technology, rather than basically saying technology is going to fix everything,
Yeah.
because that's a blanket statement that rarely serves true. I think on this slide, the disconnect from the business value is probably the most significant one for most L&D departments.
The context,
In
right?
that,
I mean, for compliance to really work, everybody who is involved needs to know the entire context, the big picture of why they are being asked to do this. I think that's as simple as that.
um, it's just so challenging to particularly within private enterprise as an L&D lead to basically make the point that all of this training is very important, because it doesn't make a measurable difference to your bottom line that you can see easily.
Hmm.
And there's another potential benefit for emerging technologies so that we can
Hmm.
make that connection that, safer, happier workforces are more productive workforces and they are affecting the bottom line. But I think, L&D and HR are pretty much in the same space at the moment, in that they are seen as a requirement rather than, a benefit.
Mm.
That they're not basically, or a lot of businesses don't see that decent investment in both HR and L&D actually does reap the rewards.
Yeah, order takers, as we are normally called, right? Instead of having a seat at the table, these are the kind of words that go across.
Yeah,
It's true, and the reason that's happening is because we're not given, or learning professionals are not really given a chance to question back and say that, why do we need to do this in this way? And it's just about, okay, we need to meet these regulatory requirements from the government, so let's go ahead and create an e-learning and roll it out. So that I don't think that works.
yeah. It it works to a point, but it gets the box tick.
Yeah.
But
It's not
yeah,
leading to decrease in the instances. We know for a fact that there are a lot of violations and regulatory blow-ups that happen in almost any industry that you take, and it shows that the systems are not perfect.
one thing that I learned was it was a project being undertaken, and there were certain people involved in the project that were continually making the same mistake while doing the work. And of course, as educational leads, I was told it's your fault because you've not taught them. And it got to the point where I was running weekly sessions on the same thing, and they were still happening.
No change.
There was change, there was reduction, and people got more aware of it, but it still happened again. And you
Yeah.
think, well, how can it possibly happen again?
Mhm. I guess
And
probably
I think this
letting up
is
a
an
solid.
issue.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
something. Yeah.
it's it's not just down to L&D. It has to be reinforced in the working environment.
Mm.
So if you're making, say, org change, which is a common use case for wanting to engage with the L&D department, you're doing org change, so you need your L&D department to disseminate the information about the org change if it's a particularly complicated org change.
Yeah.
So, if it's promoted properly, or if it's managed properly, and there's engagement and value applied to it, then that value will resonate through all of it.
Right.
But it's very much a case of fire and forget. Fix it. Make an e-learning.
As simple as that.
Um,
Like, what would you propose differently in a situation like that, where an L&D team is just given an instruction that here's an org change, this is what we need to do, and just roll out this information? What would
I
be the
know.
way to ask?
Well, I know a lot of my peers would basically look to the organisational culture as first and foremost,
Hmm.
and basically challenge the leadership and organisational leadership and say
Hmm.
why are we doing this? And not to say don't do it. We
Hmm.
just want to know why you're doing it, so we can then tell other people why you're doing it.
Correct.
It's that line of communication that is the most important. Otherwise, it starts to feel impersonal. If an organisational leader is saying, we need you to build this, these are the parameters, we say why, and they go, just do it, then there's a bit of a problem.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that's very common among the industry, but it certainly does happen. You know that it happens.
I mean, it
Because
applies
it's
to
just a
any
case of
domain if you look at it, right? That why is important in any domain for any kind of compliance training. And I sometimes think that is that the reason why, sometimes compliance training is not designed so well, like this administrative burden that happens. I've heard of a situation, a colleague in another company, pretty well-known company, he instituted this system for learning needs analysis for any kind of request that comes in for a learning solution. He set up a certain set of questions saying that why do you need this, define certain things. And there was a lot of what do you call it, opposition to that, and people were like, why do I need to answer these questions and all? Just give me the learning solution that I'm asking for, or just give me the facilitator that I'm asking for a workshop. So do you think that's probably a big issue over here, like, us trying to do the job of getting the information, asking the why is not really.
I mean, it chews up time for everybody. If it's trying to strike a balance between the highest possible quality education you can provide, but at the same time meeting pretty stringent, usually deadlines. And a lot of the time, not being given all the information you need in order to create an effective learning experience. But that's kind of part of the fun in some ways, because the instructional designer or whatever will go and find out what the important things are and then build it in and then present it as this all singing or dancing lovely prototype. But the trouble with that, the more detail that's provided, what is known is if you provide more detail on a project, the project's going to take longer and it's going to cost more. So cost is usually one of the key drivers, particularly nowadays with costs rising for everybody, businesses and individuals. It's very difficult to keep control of that. And if businesses start to see L&D and HR as effectively sunk costs because it's not product they can sell, then we've got a few problems in the more traditional methods of developing it and the more traditional costs, because it's not that cheap to produce e-learning. Maybe cheaper soon now that as soon as AI starts behaving a little bit better. But
you can't really depend on that. Yeah.
And it's quite a complicated, human intensive process right now, with a lot of people caring about the quality of learning or technical learning that they're putting in. I'm not fully convinced that that's automatable very quickly, but it will be automatable eventually.
Yeah,
Sure.
Eventually, that's the hope.
Yeah,
and that's not without its negative sides, because you see AI being used for getting around proctored exams, interviews where people are required to give certain authentic inputs, and they are using AI agents, and people are just creating bots and things, like just sitting in their living rooms and their bedrooms. It's become that easy. So
this is one of the biggest problems, I would say, at the moment with the entire system. Is the security. It's very difficult, or it's becoming more difficult to differentiate between the genuine and the not, particularly online. And AI is definitely part of that, because it's given people the ability to create things that aren't genuine but look genuine. And the natural evolution of that is that people will try to do something that's real with something that's not. The certificate fraud isn't a new thing. Even in safety critical industries, certificate fraud isn't new. It happens.
This is why a new approach is required, because we can't keep doing the same thing and getting them to sit through these classes or these e-learning programs and just say that, okay, take this content. It's not going to help. Tomorrow somebody is going to develop a system which is going to sit and click next on all those pages and the screens and get them to complete, even without sitting in front of the computer. So what are we going to do then?
Yeah. I mean, it's entirely possible that people could sell agentic packages to complete specific companies' e-learning, just for you. That's not impossible. Completely possible. I mean, that's a crazy state of affairs, and there needs to be an increase in the. If the security of e-learning, for example, decreases, then its value drops off a cliff. There would be very little point in it.
There would come a time when bodies like OSHA and your other medical standards and other once safety regulation bodies are going to come back and say, this is not working, this is not, really leading to any tangible change. So why are we still continuing with this? And that's when companies are going to start running around and saying, okay, what can we do differently? And it's already happening with the proctored exams and various other interviews and such, that people are cheating using these tools. But on the flip side, we also have these new areas, like, I don't know if you heard of Google's Project Astra. That was like a
Oh, yes.
thing for me. It's cool.
Mhm.
Imagine having wearables that give you just in time information on in mission critical jobs, saying that don't do this or be careful of this. And that's what we are looking at, right? I mean, we don't need somebody to sit through an entire digital learning program. Rather, put them in a simulated environment and let them try out everything that they can and still be safe while doing it. So I think
Yeah, I mean, I do like that. There is a body of research that says that that has reliability problem when it's a fully simulated environment, has reliability problems as well, because people understand it's simulated, and then they can do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do in a normal situation, and that makes that sort of simulation a little bit challenging. What my big excitement about stuff like Project Astra and that sort of tech is very much augmented rather than virtual reality. Mostly because I see these as adjunctive. I know I'm falling into a Microsoft trap, but I'm talking about them as co-pilots. Um, and
that's become the
the
word now. Everybody is using copilots. I mean, that's the
yeah,
word.
I
Yeah.
think the Jan LeCun, the head of Meta, he put a message out on LinkedIn either today or yesterday. It was very much putting AI in the place of a companion rather than a friend. And I think that's absolutely right. I think, we should be using them as companions, or a chatbots as companions for this sort of thing, because they're not sentient, they're not friends.
Okay, we're not friends.
But they're very efficient companions. And if you've got something like augmented reality tech, say from my background, where I was scrubbed in for, say, a hip replacement operation. That was a revision hip replacement operation, and there's maybe 500 instruments on trays open in front of me. If
Yeah.
I've got AR tech and I'm learning that, the AR tech can track them, it can name them, it can point at the thing that I can't remember the name of because there's 500 of them,
Right.
and that's only one surgery. So, for stuff where the complexity increases, stuff like AR, and again, in oil, if you're working in an augmented reality, you can put labels on things, and that can make a big difference.
Clouds that come out, and when you're looking at them, true.
Yeah.
It's becoming more and more, available nowadays. You can see that Google
Definitely.
Glass, I think Meta has their Ray-Ban sunglasses. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
But that's a very exciting potential use of AR tech. Absolutely fantastic. The trouble is that the big use for that sort of tech, any tech with a camera, is going to be surveillance. So you want to make sure that you've got decent privacy on all your data, which sort of leads into the security aspects as well, I guess.
Thing is, irrespective of what we do with technology, we still see that human element, that human oversight is very important in all of these training requirements, and pretty much any kind of analytics that is going on. Sure, system can collect all the data that is created, but who is going to make inferences and see how to improve the state, or how to improve the learning solution or the experience in a better way? So that's definitely something that only a human can do.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of sort of harks back to sort of classical debate between social constructivism and technological determinism. We've got a lot of people right now shouting technological determinism from the rooftops. This is going to change the world.
Correct.
Yeah, but
Singapore, it's almost here. Yeah.
Yeah, but we need to build it first.
Yeah.
We people.
We.
So it's like it's never one or the other. It's always a sort of subtle combination of both.
And so I think this particular slide over here, that kind of shows us what we think is maybe a good vision for how compliance need to be handled or compliance training, definitely there's going to be, human centered validation, where we need to bring back those experts. We need to make sure that they have the right tools available to be there, give the required oversight, make sure that everybody, whoever needs support, gets it. And I think this competency, progressive competency that you mentioned, John, earlier, about apprenticeship and then becoming a journeyman and then going up to a master, and at each level, you get the required help that you need to understand the why behind what you're doing. So that's really important. I think that clicks somewhere, and probably a good way to go about it, using technology to aid you, because that's available. So human centered, overall systems, but also making sure that we maintain that role based competencies, and make sure that everybody knows that this is the level that I'm at, this is the level that I need to progress to, these are the pathways through which I need to go through. It's all very transparent to everyone. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I think the mentorship or buddy system, more than anything else, is kind of more where I feel things should be going in the future, rather than this completely impersonal. And I mean, I suppose it could be seen as how it used to work was betterism, because I was in the working world before all of this stuff went digital and it went e-learning. But there was more of a personal touch, for sure. When I was first integrated into the workplace, I was assigned a mentor in that workplace, and I worked with them for years. And I grew alongside them, rather than just being sat down in a room to look through a file with all of the policies in it, or do some e-learning. Which seems to be what it's descended into.
Correct.
And I think that we've tipped the needle too far in the other direction. I think that rather than being assigned e-learning on arrival, we should be assigned a person, and that doesn't necessarily need to be the person who's in charge of us. It just needs to be a person who can help guide us through what the expectations of that company's culture are, and what the expectations of the government are. I think that's a much better way of doing it.
I think that's right on. Like, we can't forget that human involvement in, especially when it comes to something so mission critical, leading to, safety issues and all of that. Definitely not.
And I think people, they start to see certain things as a burden. It's got to a point where people who are experienced in certain roles will see the training of others as a burden. I remember I was put into a role that was an educational lead role, and one of the things that I heard someone say was, "Oh, great, we won't have to train anybody anymore." They were not happy. They were not happy when they discovered that really wasn't how it was going to work.
See, this requires that shift in attitude, shift in perspective. It's very much required over here. It's not going to go anywhere. Yeah,
for sure.
So, having said that, I think if somebody were to get into that mode where they want to see if their current systems are really valid, if they're active, and if they need to make those kind of improvements, I think this is kind of a roadmap that we have put together. Obviously starts with understanding what our current state is. So it requires asking a lot of questions, probing the right people, and the end learners, the processes, and making sure that we understand what are the gaps that are there. And then once we understand the gaps, then we can kind of think of what are the solutions that we need to bring in. And yes, always start small. We can build out some pilots, some things that help us quickly gauge whether things are really moving, if it's working. And if it's not, then it's not, spend some time. I think that's one of the best lessons I've got from recent AI teams and companies that are suddenly coming up, and then probably a week later, they're just going off, because they're not really spending a lot of time on their ideas. They're just seeing if it really works, if it's valid. If not, let's move on to the next one. So I think it lies here.
No,
And
I like. I think the probably the most important part of the roadmap is just to have a look at the effectiveness. I think that we're drawing into question the effectiveness of this sort of compliance-based training, saying it's a checkbox, but there are ways of measuring them. We could use systems of microlearning to basically just randomly chuck out questions to employees about the finer points of GDPR or whatever,
yeah,
and see how they respond.
yeah,
But I think open responses rather than text-based responses would be a big step in the right. Instead of multi-choice responses, would be a big step in the right direction, because there's an enormous difference between picking the correct out of 4 different choices and articulating the correct answer in your own language, and then having maybe a nice fancy newfangled system that can understand what you've wrote and then evaluate whether or not you understand the particular legislation or whatever.
if you don't
And
want to,
that
you don't want to
is,
write it down, at least speak it out. I mean, you have systems that just capture your voice and
yes,
get it. So
yeah.
why not?
But in a situation whereby we don't presently do that with humans, unless usually something goes wrong, then we
Yeah,
sort of retroactively go back and say, well, why didn't they do that?
yeah,
Then I think that having an increase in the onus of responsibility on humans for that sort of compliance training is probably going to have very valuable effects.
yeah, yeah. And mentorship, I think that's a huge point that we got in all these things that we were discussing today. Human oversight and real expert guidance is very much, we can't really overlook it in any way, can't really understate that it's important, because and this is interesting, John. I met an old friend of mine today. It's like he's a director of a company, and he used to kind of run the trainings in a blended fashion, where there would be e-learning as well as some bit of facilitator-driven sessions, and that was happening till about 2 years back. Today, when I met him, he was saying that no, I've gone back to my old systems where I need facilitator-driven people having real conversations, and digital first is not a strategy in certain cases. And I was really happy to hear
Yeah,
that he's doing pretty well.
yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. No, yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that sentiment, definitely.
yeah. So yes, human oversight and guidance, and definitely making sure that whatever we do has a link back to business objectives and the larger question of why it is that we are doing. That's important. We got to keep that running throughout. And here are some questions that we think people should ask their the organizations and the compliance teams, and basically ask themselves if they are related to any kind of compliance training. And these could kind of give you some perspectives. I know that there are a lot of questions out there, and depending on the domain, depending on the situation, I think various new questions would come up. But yeah, these I think would be a starting point. Like, for example, what specific compliance training obstacles are there? It's a very broad based question, but then if you really get into the nitty gritties of it, there's a lot of information that we can get from various
For
points.
sure. I think the interesting one on the slide there is definitely effectiveness measurement. That's kind of the really interesting one to me on this slide.
Yeah,
Because a lot of times, my experience, that's the part of ADDIE that people don't really bother with, and
correct.
that's mostly related to ROI. Well, we've put out the training course, people are doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
They're
it's
just tracking
always the
completion. That's all that they're doing, tracking completion. God only
that's
knows
it.
what
It's
they're going to get
pure,
from that metric, but
yeah, purely completion rates, which is not very good.
yeah,
One thing that we always talk about and learn as instructional designers or those interested in education is that it is an individualistic process, and
yeah,
feedback from individuals who completed your training is probably
very
far more
important.
important than completion rates.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Now
so
with the whole vibe coding thing, I think even the mood of the learner, the emotional state of the learner is very important when we are getting into these kind of trainings.
absolutely, yeah, 100%. And you know, and I think that traditionally the industry has been quite bad at adopting pathways of doing more intensive evaluation.
Mm.
SCORM's still very much the standard,
Mm.
despite XAPI existing for e-learning that gives you far more information and can tell you exactly how long your person watched the video for, and you know when they started, and that gives you much more insight into how engaging your learning is, how actually engaging your learning is.
Yeah,
Are a majority of people failing at the same point, or are they losing interest at the same point? These are things that you could figure out. But we
yeah,
never really bothered, even though we had the technology, and that's because it was far too difficult to translate all of our existing content into the new technology. And I think that's universal. There's very few people that are distributing XAPI content and analytics as standard.
correct.
Um, so yeah, but I think you know the new
Even
technologies will have the opportunity to make that much more interesting.
true. Yeah. Even in content creation, also, I was thinking that, compliance in a particular domain with a particular company might be applicable across geographies, across, people in various countries, right? And I've seen this need where sometimes people just create it in English and they just translate it into various languages. Now, specific behavioral compliance trainings require not just translation, they require to be localized properly, because it's
Yep.
those cultural nuances that really go into those trainings. And if we are not going to get that right, people are not going to be interested. So it's another issue. There are a lot of issues when it comes to compliance training. I'm suddenly realizing.
Very, very difficult. Very difficult issue. You know, translation, localization, very difficult.
Yeah,
Especially in safety critical stuff. You
correct.
don't want to mess around with it.
Yeah,
It's not the sort of environment where I'm thinking, yeah, we'll just go download this AI translator from the internet. We'll just do our safety critical training through it. You know, it'll be
yeah,
fine.
yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God. But yeah, it's good that we are seeing these things, and it's good that we are discussing these. I really hope that we can spark conversation, and the next time somebody is coming to us and asking us to create something, I'm really hoping that we ask some questions back and we really understand. The main thing is to understand the why, as I see it, and keep
Yeah.
uh, you know telling that to everybody involved, as in this is the reason why you're taking this, and making sure that it's applicable to their jobs and their states as a learner, making sure that compliance really fits. That's the only way that we can drive engagement. Otherwise, it's just
Sure.
another tick box that they are checking.
So,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Great. So I think thanks, John. This is an amazing 1 hour. I think we had a lot of insights into compliance training, and I really hope that the participants who stayed on this webinar, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Put it up in the chat box. We'd be happy to answer your queries. Or we're here. We'll be coming back with more webinars. We are on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, any concerns, anything that you'd like to discuss, please reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to kind of engage in a conversation and see how we can change the situation here. So yes, John,
Something lit up in the Q&A.
let's see what's going on there.
Okay, so it says, in your experience, how can organizations effectively align behavioral compliance with operational compliance, particularly when there's a disconnect between leadership expectations and day-to-day practices on the ground? Yeah, I mean, that is very much the big problem. I mean, I gave Vijak an example earlier of something along the lines of infection control in hospital. So if you want to reduce your infection rates in a hospital, you obviously need to reduce the number of things that cause infection. And one of those would be contaminated hands. So the big idea becomes, right, so we need to make sure that we've got people fully compliant in the current method of washing hands according to the World Health Organization. Makes sense? Yeah, makes a lot of sense. WHO know what they're talking about. Of course they
Yeah.
do. They're brilliant. But then the trouble is that then you have to go and tell a tenured surgeon of 30 years that you're about to watch him wash his hands and pick him apart for it, who is then going to throw something at you and tell you to judge him on his infection rates, which is the correct thing to do. So you do get these disconnects where people who are being they're doing the correct thing, they're being altruistic. Yeah, there's absolutely no question that if you wash your hands like the WHO tell you to wash your hands, then you are going to reduce infection rates. But in a lot of instances, that's a theoretical reduction.
Not going
The
to fly the
differential,
surgeon. Yeah.
yeah, it's just there's so many people involved.
Yes, swear.
It starts to become a little farcical when you're
Yeah.
spending more time managing are we managing to audit our hand hygiene properly than we are caring for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just doesn't
Ultimately,
make
that's
sense.
supposed to be the outcome, but yeah, that's not what we are
Yes.
concentrating on.
So
Sad.
there must be a better way. There must be a better way of providing that assurance that these people, these highly skilled, highly professional medical professionals who do understand infection, they might have read about it once or twice, to not basically treat them like they're children
Mm.
and show them exactly how to wash their hands and then criticize them when they get it wrong even slightly. It really
We
doesn't
have to
work
find
like
a
that.
different way. We have to find a different
Yeah,
way.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's hope we get there, and definitely gonna see you around on another one of our webinar series. And thank you so much, John, for joining us over here.
No,
Had a
it's been
great.
a pleasure. As always, thanks very much, Vijak. Thanks, Apposite.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for your time, and looking forward to the next one. Signing off. Bye.
Cool. Take it easy.